There's a kind of magic in animation that just doesn't quite exist anywhere else. As a kid, I grew up watching animated shows practically from the moment I could walk to now my adult life. What pulls me in is not the art style or the action, it is the stories. Animation has a way of building entire worlds that feel alive, layered and real. Shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender didn't just convey a beautiful overarching story, they constructed unique cultures, history, and philosophies. Teen Titans wasn't just about superheroes, it centered itself on the exploration of identity, friendship, and sacrifice in a way that stuck with me long after the screen went black. Even something as lighthearted and silly as Danny Phantom introducing a protagonist who exists as a living paradox, a Schrodinger's cat suspended between life and death, caught between two worlds and identities. These weren't stories told through animation, but stories told with animation in mind, crafted to take full advantage of what the medium allows. Animation isn't just a tool to visualize a script, it is a canvas where form and narrative become inseparable. Animators can bend time, stretch reality, and use stylistic shifts to reflect a character's inner world. A moment of emotional collapse can be externalized by the literal crumbling of a background. A memory or dream can shift art styles completely, allowing the audience to feel a change in tone or psyche without having to do any dialogue. These are not stylistic flourishes, they're baked into the storytelling in a way that live action rarely attempts, and for the most part cannot successfully incorporate. This is what I mean when I say stories can be made with animation in mind. It's not just the visual flair, it's about what the flair can do for the narrative. The medium dictates the tools available to the storyteller. Camera angles, physics, lighting, and even character design become language. A character doesn't just cry, their shadow might grow darker, their environment may twist and warp. The medium allows form and emotion to merge. And when a story is conceived in that space, it's hard to translate without losing something. That challenge becomes ever more clear to me with the release of the live-action remake of one of my favorite childhood movies, How to Train Your Dragon. And it sparked the core question of this video. Do live-action remakes actually add anything meaningful to the stories they retell? If we're judging that based solely on How to Train Your Dragon, then the answer, at least for me, is no. This remake is faithful, visually impressive, and well-intentioned, but despite all that, it left me emotionally untouched. It didn't deepen my connection to the characters, nor did it offer a fresh take or expanded meaning. That alone isn't proof that remakes can't work, but How to Train Your Dragon is a great case study for this question for two main reasons. First, as I mentioned, it's one of the most faithful remakes I've ever seen, making it easy to compare to its original and inspect the changes or lack thereof. Second, it's a story that could work in a live-action setting. Fantasies have thrived in this medium for decades at this point. We've seen it done with franchises like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, where world building and spectacle still shine in a live-action format. It's a high bar, but not an unreachable one. So why did How to Train Your Dragon fall flat despite the strength of its source material? In my opinion, the remake isn't bad. Visually, it's well designed, the costumes are spot on, and I actually liked how they reimagined Berk for the live scene. But the casting was a bit hit or miss. Hiccup, Stoic, and Snotlout were great. They really captured the essence of their characters. Gobber was fine. His humor came off at times mean-spirited more than sarcastic, which undercut his charm that the original captured. The twins were weak. The acting overall felt inconsistent, which made the tone waver at times. Astrid was the one character who saw notable changes. The remake gave her a clearer motivation. She now has a strong desire to become the next chief. This reframes her early disdain for Hiccup as stemming from seeing him as competition rather than just annoyance, which is an interesting choice. While the overall story pacing closely follows the original, the pacing within individual scenes often felt rushed. On top of that, the framing choices at times forces the scenes to feel overly tight and claustrophobic. A clear example is the opening attack on Berk. It relied heavily on close-up shots of the characters even as the large-scale battle unfolded around them. This decision limited the viewer's ability to grasp the full scope of the chaos, stripping away the sense of scale that the animation captured so well. making the scene feel smaller and less impactful than it should have. At the narrative level, the remake is nearly beat for beat the same as the original. That approach has earned it a fair amount of praise, with even some calling it the best live-action remake to date, largely because it doesn't deviate wildly from the source material or dilute its emotional core. And yes, in a current film landscape where remakes often strip away what made the original special, fidelity does feel like a relief for the general audience. But that kind of loyalty to the original also reveals a significant limitation. Being faithful is commendable, but it's not the same thing as being meaningful. A remake that hits the same emotional notes, tells the same story, and ends in the same place hasn't necessarily justified its own existence. It may work as an echo, but not as a new voice in the conversation. So what does this remake actually add? On a surface level, it introduces a great story to a new generation. And that's not nothing. There's genuine value in keeping stories alive, especially those with strong messages about empathy, courage, and understanding. A new audience, especially younger viewers, might find this version more accessible simply because it's new, polished, and in the current cultural spotlight. It also makes an effort to deepen certain character dynamics. Astrid is now framed as someone with ambition, someone who wants to become the next chief. That subtle reframing, like I mentioned earlier, changes her early hostility towards Hiccup from disdain to competition, and that's a fascinating shift. Likewise, Snotlout is given a thread about trying to win his father's approval, adding potential emotional weight to a character who was mostly comic relief in the original. But these new layers aren't fully explored. The remake is only about 4 minutes longer than the animated film, which is not enough time to flesh out the new material. Snotlout still devotes most of his screen time to flirting with Astrid, which dilutes the supposed internal struggle he's meant to be having. His desire for validation never truly intersects with the plot or affects his decisions in any meaningful way. Astrid's ambition also feels more like a background detail than a driving force. Something mentioned early on, but forgotten by the time the story reaches its climax. It doesn't influence her actions, choices, or growth in any concrete way. These additions had promise. They could have added depth and complexity, but without follow-through they feel hollow. The film introduces new ingredients but never stirs them into the mix. So instead of enhancing the story, these ideas hang loosely on the edges, never fully integrating with the emotional arc or narrative stakes. Another change involves the origin of Berk. In the remake, it's said to have been founded by a group of elite dragon hunters from across the world, a detail added to suggest a more global backstory. On its own, that's a fine addition, but the world of Berk still looks and feels entirely Nordic. The architecture, clothing, customs, and visual design remain unchanged. None of the diverse cultural influences hinted at in the backstory are reflected in the village's actual culture. As a result, the new origin feels less like world building and more like a post hoc justification, mainly there to explain the film's more diverse casting. Without visual or narrative follow-through, this idea doesn't expand the world so much as it highlights the inconsistency in how it's being presented. So what we're left with is a visually solid remake that retells the same story but doesn't dig deeper. That doesn't mean all remakes are going to disappoint, but that does show the difference between recreating and reimagining. A remake can absolutely add value. It can shift focus, provide richer context, explore character relationships from new angles, or reframe a theme to fit a different time. It can highlight overlooked subtext or bring forward voices that weren't centered in the original. But to do that, it has to be bold enough to evolve the story, not just replay it. A successful remake understands not just what the story was, but what it could have been when placed in a new medium, a different cultural moment, or a broader worldview. That's what I want from retellings. Not perfection, but purpose. If a live-action remake can preserve what made the original great while also expanding or recontextualizing it, then it becomes more than a copy. It becomes a companion piece, a continuation of the conversation the original started. I truly love the original How to Train Your Dragon, and I'm glad the remake honors it. but my passion for the story just makes me want to see it told better and better. I'm not opposed to remakes, I just want them to do more than mimic. I want them to mean something. There's still potential for live-action retellings to contribute something new, but so far we haven't truly seen a live-action remake rise to that challenge, to take a beloved story and not just replicate it, but reimagine it in a way that feels both fresh and necessary. Hopefully someday soon, a remake will come along that doesn't just revisit the past, but builds meaningful on it, offering not just nostalgia, but new insight, proving my theory that a live-action remake can add to a story. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be posting bi-weekly, so I hope to see you again at the next one.